There's a verse in the book of Proverbs that basically reads, "The prudent person sees trouble coming and prepares for it." The full verse basically reads, "The prudent see danger and take refuge, but the simple keep going and pay the penalty." The word prudent sometimes refers to being shrewd, but that can have certain negative connotations. The larger idea is that someone has good sense or common sense, a person who considers things carefully and makes an appropriate choice or a beneficial choice, somebody who basically does what's good for business. The word translated simple doesn't mean stupid, it doesn't mean unintelligent, but it means someone who lacks experience. They're unaware of the dangers that they walk into if they're unprepared. So the careful person, the shrewd person, sees danger coming and takes steps to avoid the danger, where the ignorant person will just walk right into it. So it's a matter of avoiding trouble or meeting trouble head on, unprepared. This short little verse is probably one of the wisest admonitions in Scripture. And it pertains to business, it pertains to freelancing, it pertains to you as an independent creative, serving clients, building your business, doing things that are appropriate and good and right for your business to ensure your success. And what I want to do with it is specifically apply it to the use of contracts when you're working with clients. So I hope you'll stay with me. I'm Alvalyn Lundgren, and this is the Freelance Road Trip Podcast. We're located at the intersection of inspired creativity and common business sense, and we talk about everything they don't teach in design school but should if you want to build a business around your creative work. Here in the podcast, I share proven strategies and practical answers that can transform your creative drive into a thriving independent business so that you can accelerate your creative and material growth. And whether you're just starting out or you're in need of a tune-up, if you're a creativepreneur who wants to build a business and life doing what you love because working for someone else just doesn't do it for you, this is the place to be. This is show 127. You can find the show notes at freelanceroadtrip.com/show 127. So we're talking about contracts and asking the question, what could go wrong if you don't use contracts? We can easily apply this proverb to the use of contracts when working with clients. Neglecting to get the project parameters and expectations in writing up front opens the door for all kinds of trouble to walk in. Your road ahead will be full of potholes and roadblocks if you aren't careful about defining things up front. And it's a fact that there are so many freelancers in all sectors who work without written contracts. They work basically on verbal agreements, and more often than not, those verbal agreements come up short in actually defining the full scope and parameters of a project and a working relationship. Once an initial conversation is concluded and the basic parameters of a project are decided, there's often not even a follow-up email to confirm what was decided. The freelancer just starts the project. I myself am guilty of having done this. It didn't work out well. A number of years ago, I moved forward on a couple of projects based on a verbal go-ahead. I invested time and effort, and in one case, when it came to that first review of concept, the client was actually surprised because they weren't expecting me to be working on anything. From their point of view, they had given me a very tentative okay. What they didn't inform me about was they had two partners that needed to be in on the agreement and in on the project parameters. And when he went and talked with his partners, they evidently said no. So the project got tabled. I was not told. So you can imagine that I was irritated, first of all, at the client. And this was not a new client. This was a client that I'd worked with on several projects before. But I had misunderstood the intent of this particular partner. And I went ahead based on what I thought was a verbal agreement, but there was nothing backing it up. And so I was also angry then at myself for being so foolish as to move forward without having a firm agreement in place. So these are the things that you learn from as a freelance creative. And they're really hard lessons to learn. And wouldn't you prefer to not have to learn them via your own experience, but through somebody else's? And so that's why I'm glad you're listening to the podcast, so you don't have to make that same kind of mistake, because that can be very painful. I remember it took me a while to get over that one and kind of browbeating myself because I was basically stupid. And then the concern about looking foolish in the eyes of the client. It is so important to get things in writing up front, and I cannot stress it enough, because I talk with so many freelancers who run into trouble and they tell me their troubles and they're not working with contracts. And much of what they're troubled about can be entirely avoided if only they'd put things in writing. Why don't they? Why are freelancers so afraid of working with contracts? You know, I do a bit of coaching, and coaching, of course, is one-on-one, and I help people find their way, so to speak. When a fellow freelancer comes to me for advice and direction regarding a client problem, and that's usually what it is, one of my first questions is, well, what does your contract say? More often than not, they don't have a contract. That is the number one problem that they have to solve. And they may not be able to solve it in the current situation, but they can solve it going forward so that they never experience the problem again. So the thing is, if we know that a working relationship can go south, because we know that any relationship can go south, it's simply common sense. It's simply prudent to prepare for that kind of scenario. If we ask what could go wrong in this project up front, then we realize the need for putting the agreement in writing, and we have the basis for writing a contract. With freelance creatives, a boilerplate contract template that you download from the internet doesn't address the particulars of the creative work, so you have to be really careful. I advocate for creating your own template, and we do this in the Freelance Road Trip Business School. I also have a contract pack in the Freelance Road Trip shop that you can use as a template. Some of the things that a boilerplate contract does not address include transfer of rights to the work that you're creating, because there are copyright issues. You are creating intellectual property for a client. You, as the author, are the owner. You have to transfer the appropriate rights to the client. Ownership of the working files and preliminary work, sketches, AI files, PSD files, Affinity Designer files. The working files generally should stay with you, the creator, so your contract needs to differentiate between what the client gets and what they don't get. You always negotiate and work things out with the client. You need to give the client what they need, but you don't want to go overboard and give them everything. Then there's the matter of creative reviews. How many times will you present work in progress for approval to a client? At what point do additional creative reviews require additional payment? And scope creep is basically, and I've talked about scope creep in other episodes, but scope creep is basically where the deliverables, the amount of work, changes. And it usually increases, means it kind of creeps up on you. It gets larger, and the client wants you to throw in this and throw in that. How are you going to handle that? That needs to be listed out in your terms of service, in your contract. There are other things you should include in your contract, such as your basic working hours, your business hours. When are you open for business and when are you not? As a freelancer, you decide when and where and how you work. If the client is deciding that, then you're their employee, and that's antithetical to freelancing. It's a good idea to include not necessarily hours of operation, but when you are available to converse or connect with the client. Another thing to include in your contract are payment terms. Especially if it's a longer project. Are you going to require a down payment? And if so, how much? Is the invoicing going to be progressive? What are the benchmarks at which payments are going to be made? At what point do you deliver the final files to the client? Before you get paid the final invoice or after you get paid the final invoice? And since we're in the age of AB5, it's a good idea to put a statement in your contract that you are an independent contractor and you're not an employee, and also the work you're doing is not a work for hire. So your contract needs to be very specific in regard to your terms of service. So if your intention is to do work for clients and to be paid for that work, it's important to have an agreement in writing. You're more likely to be paid by the client and less likely to deal with scope creep when you have a written document. If there's disagreement about expectations, you have the written document you can refer to. I had to do that recently where I finished the work for a client, sent off the final files, and about a year later, they came back and asked for the working files. And I was able to point to the contract, remind them that the working files are mine, and I'm happy to hand them over for an additional fee. But if they don't want to pay that additional fee, I can hand them the final files that went to the printer, which again are not my working files, they're the mechanicals. You never know what's going to come up or when it's going to come up. So having a working contract that you can refer to prevents trouble. Well, what if your client won't sign a contract? Well, here's a very direct and concise answer. Your client is not your client until they sign your contract. So don't do any work for them. Don't start the project. There's no reason to invest your time and energy on behalf of a person or business who does not intend to pay you. And if they won't sign a contract, it could very well be that they don't intend to pay you or they don't intend to pay you in full. So refusing to sign a contract can be a sure indicator that the client isn't serious and may be planning to take advantage of you. And that's what, in that proverb, the idea of being simple is. Easily taken advantage of. It's somebody who is unaware and they're walking right into something unaware that there's trouble all around. Now, most clients are trustworthy. Most clients are business people. They need to do business well. So the ones that aren't are few and far between, but they are out there. The trustworthy clients understand that your creative services are necessary for their own prosperity. They're making an investment in their brand, in their messaging, in their marketing. They're making an investment in their future growth. They may have questions about your contract, but they generally won't refuse to sign it. If they have questions, you simply answer the questions honestly and simply. The issue is those few clients who won't sign. So then you get to ask, if they won't agree in writing, why won't they? What is their basis? So my admonition to you, fellow freelancer, is to do business, to make good business decisions, because good business decisions, doing what's good and right for your business growth, will increase your likelihood for long-term success and give you the ability to support your life. And if you are a family person, to help support your family, your household. If you have a particular situation and you want to talk it over, if you want my advice and counsel, I'm happy to give it. I have 40 years experience freelancing and working with clients of all sorts, all types. Go to freelanceroadtrip.com/coaching and book a session. If you have questions that you would like answered in podcast format and you want to suggest a podcast topic or two, please do so. Send your ideas to connect@freelanceroadtrip.com. Well, thank you for listening. I really appreciate you hanging out with me for this brief time. Again, you'll find the notes for the show at freelanceroadtrip.com/show127. To find out about the business school program, go to freelanceroadtrip.com. If you want to get my newsletter twice a month in your inbox, go to freelanceroadtrip.com/newsletter and sign up. Connect with me on Instagram at Freelance Road Trip and also at Alvalin Creative, and follow me on X at Freelance Trip. May you prosper in all things and be in health as your soul prospers, and I'll see you on the road.